Well, let's start with some introductions. I'm Lawrence Yang. I'm a family doctor in Surrey. Um, John, introduce yourself to the listeners.
I'm John Penhall. I'm a family doctor in Campbell River. I do a little bit of everything, and I've been here for 20 years.
Wow. Yeah, Campbell River. Now that's somewhere northern on Vancouver Island.
Yeah, it's north of Nanaimo, sort of almost in the center of the island. And
Hmm.
we have a drainage area of about 50,000 people.
50,000 people. Yeah. Many of our listeners have been to Vancouver Island. Some live there, but maybe some haven't actually been to Campbell River. One of
Yeah,
my
it's
first
absolutely
memories of
gorgeous.
Campbell River was going there in the summertime, and then it was a dessert cart, like a mobile food cart, and they sold something called monkey tails. Have you ever tried a monkey
I
tail?
have never, I'm from Africa, so I haven't tried a Campbell River monkey tail.
You've tried an actual monkey tail.
Yeah,
No.
interestingly, there's a source from South Africa, and I have all my my kids, I have a 14 and a 16-year-old, and all the boys like to go fishing with me because I like to fish. So, and there's a sauce from South Africa called monkey gland sauce, which is like a well-known steak sauce. It's got no monkey glands in it, but the kids were a bit horrified when I pulled it out. It's just like a hot sauce, similar to like a Korean barbecue sauce, maybe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's called monkey gland sauce, and the kids were horrified. How can we eat that? We eat it
Monkey
because
gland source. Yeah. Well, a monkey tail in my context was it was a banana, a peeled
oh,
banana, frozen, and then dipped in chocolate, which
that
then
sounds reasonable.
subsequently froze. So it's a layer of chocolate on top of banana. It
Oh,
was
that's all right.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
delicious.
no, it's a lovely place. I mean, I moved here for initially to Canada to come and restart my plastic surgical specialty, and I just liked it so much. I've never left. I came for 2 years, and that was in 2002.
Wow. That was okay. So it's been like 20 years. Yeah, 20
20.
years, just like you said.
Yeah.
I ran into a fellow, he goes by the name of Minton. He works up in Nanaimo.
Yeah.
Uh, and he had said that he'd left South Africa in 2012.
Yeah.
And he told me that if he was still working in South Africa, he'd probably get paid the equivalent of 50,000 Canadian dollars a year to
Oh,
work there.
yeah. Yeah.
But he said
That's
the buying power would be similar to what maybe 200,000 Canadian would get.
oh, for sure. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I haven't practiced in South Africa, in fact, since 1997. I worked in Botswana as a rural GP
Oh,
surgeon for 6 years before I came here. So,
wow.
so actually, I don't go back very often. Most of my family is not actually South African. I have family in Cyprus and in the UK. So the last time I was there was quite a while ago, 2007.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I think it must have been challenging to switch from being a plastic surgeon to being a surgeon and then changing into a family physician.
Well, I didn't finish my residency. I did 3 years, two and a half years of, the residency program is very different there. So we have a 6 year medical school program, a year of rotating internship, which is mandatory for everybody. And then all the long surgical residencies, so not gynae, which is 4 years, but plastics, orthopedics, gen surge are 5 years. Everybody starts with a year of gen surge and rotation because it's a 5 year program. So I started with that and then did that, and you do plastics call for. And then I left. It was around the time when apartheid was ending, and there was a lot of violence and uh, and I always intended to go back, and I didn't want to leave Africa. So I moved to Botswana and worked for a mining company. And the big mining companies in Africa and actually in Asia often have their own private hospitals. So they needed a surgical guy, like a gen, and of course, because we all have GP training, I kind of slotted into that for 4 odd years. I really liked it. I was in a very remote area of the north of Botswana. It was very, very nice. But then I got into medical administration and I was managing the hospital by default. I was only in my 20s, but the manager of the hospital, the chief medical officer, resigned, and the other guys didn't want to do it. So I ended up doing it, and that wasn't really my thing. Like I like clinical medicine, and I always have. So I wasn't super keen on the management aspect of it. So then I thought I'd come back to Canada and apply for plastics, and it just never. I did actually put my name in the match, actually, but but then I just, I think I'm a generalist at heart, and I like family practice. And I was lucky enough that I'm with a lot of really fantastic people. We have a fabulous practice. We've never had fights about money or about call or about work. So I think I was just very lucky to have fallen into a perfect practice for me, right? I still do maternity and emergencies and hospital work, and I assist our plastic surgeons, which is fun because I do overseas relief work. So I do sometimes have to operate. So it's kind of nice. I assist one of our local plastic surgeons, and he's very skilled. And in South Africa, plastic surgery, the hands are done by orthopedic surgery. So he's a hand fellowship guy. So I've learned a lot about hand surgery from him. So it's still been a use. I'm not just holding retractors. So it's been a useful experience. Yeah.
Wow. So what does it mean to do overseas relief work? What does that mean?
Well, so I started off again somewhat by default when I was working for the mine. All of us had specialized training in underground rescue because most of the mines don't have paramedic teams. So the physicians actually go underground and fetch the patients when there's a major disaster. So we all had, different training in terms of disaster management, on-scene management of trauma, access and egress, getting them in and out the mine. Um, and then, in Botswana, being a little bit north of South Africa, we were somewhat involved. There were some major floods in, I think, 2001 that I was involved with in Mozambique. Um, we didn't have a complete evacuation evacuation service, so we had to deal quite a lot with the Botswana military, who are very professional. They're all British trained and they have great equipment. So that's kind of how I got into it. If there was a disaster, their military is small. It's only a country of 1.5 million people. They would ask local physicians to come and help. So I did some work in the north of Botswana. There's a large refugee camp there called Dukwe, which has a lot of Somali refugees which have come down through Africa. So I did some work there, and then um, I went with an emergency relief team to Haiti like 2 days after the earthquake, and I've been to Port-au-Prince a couple of times to work in the ER there and ICU, so that their physicians can go to Miami and do CME. So it's been really quite interesting. It's just an addition of things to keep me interested.
Wow. Remind me what year that big
So the big
Haiti
earthquake was in
earthquake,
2010.
2010. So you'd already been here 8 years, and then you decide to go back. What organization was it that
So
allowed you to easily go back?
I
Yeah.
went with Food for the Hungry, which is an American relief organization that had actually never sent a medical team. They sent Food for the Hungry is quite big in Korea, so we had a Korean team with us who were fascinating. They've been going to Haiti for many years, and interestingly, because I mean English is a hard language to learn, right? Like, so a lot of Koreans don't speak very good English. They'd been going for so many years that they had Haitian translators who spoke perfect Korean that were their translators, which I thought was fascinating. Yeah, they were incredibly organized. They bought a 747 full of supplies. And actually, it was interesting. We used their supplies, and luckily, one of our nurses was from Vancouver. He's also ethnically Korean, and she could at least read the labels because, of course, all the medication supplies were in Korean. Yeah,
What
very
an
interesting.
experience.
It was
A
amazing.
Korean airplane in
Yeah,
Haiti, and
yeah,
wow. And you
yeah,
had Botswanans who
yeah,
spoke Korean.
yeah. No, I'm Haitians who spoke Korean.
Oh,
The,
Haitians, yeah.
I think they called the Good People. It's quite apparently quite a well-known Korean organization.
Ah, the good people.
Non-denominational. I think they called the Good People, if I remember correctly. And they've been
Ah,
going to Haiti for many years, and they trained Haitians. They brought Haitians back to Seoul to learn Korean so that they could be more useful. They were fabulous to deal with, and of course, they come from a very high-tech medical system. So it was interesting working with them. Yeah.
mm. Do you have plans to continue to do that type of work outside of Canada?
Well, I do, and I mean, when I get asked, I'll go.
Mm,
I like Haiti. It reminds me of home. I mean,
mm,
Haiti's on Hispaniola Island, but it's not. It's a very much more African than South American. I mean, half of the island is the Dominican Republic, which is clearly Latin America.
mm,
The Haitians, they speak Creole, very similar to West Africans. They look like West Africans. Their cuisine is the same. It reminded me very much of home, so I'm very comfortable there.
I didn't know that Creole was spoken in West Africa. Okay.
Yeah.
There are
And
so
the
many
same in
languages.
the Seychelles, right? I actually have
Mhm.
a Mauritian partner, and I didn't know this before I went, but he said that the Mauritian Creole and the Haitian Creole is pretty much identical.
Wow. Wow. So Campbell River, you said you have a great team there.
Mm.
Is the con and it sounds like you have quite a varied practice.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Yeah. We were just given this potential for this new payment model in
Yes.
February 2023. I think you'd mentioned that it might not actually benefit you at all,
Well, I
this
mean,
new.
look, I mean, we all, we all view these things in terms of vested self-interest, obviously. I mean, our
Yeah.
primary concern is how do we feed our families, pay our mortgages and stuff. And I mean, I think, numerous of the things that we'd all asked for, some capitation, some fee for service, and a component of hourly rate to compensate us for all the extra clinical work we do. So I think in principle, it's something that we all really should strongly support. But it was very short on practicalities. And for those of us with bigger, more varied practices who do a lot of hospital work, obviously it doesn't benefit us. But to be fair, I mean, as you know, online, we've had extensive conversations with the movers and shakers from Doctors of BC, and I've had my criticisms of them, but they've made it quite clear that they are certainly going to address that. And I mean, for somebody like me, there's certainly no rush to jump into this. We have months, there'll be an intake in February, which I think certainly for me, I won't do. But there'll be another intake in July, and my partners and I have talked about it. And one of the strengths of this model is the problem with the contracts was that it was an all or nothing thing, that your whole practice had to convert or nobody, which was preposterous because not everybody's practice lent itself to it. And I think that lent to a lot of people who otherwise might have considered it just thinking, well, I'm not going to do that. And one of the strengths of the new model is that it's an individual thing. You can, you can choose. We could be in practice together. You could choose to do it. I wouldn't, and that wouldn't be a problem. So I think that's really one of the big strengths is that we do still have a choice. I mean, I am concerned that there appears to be quite a significant amount of funding moving out of, well, the GPSC funding that will follow the physicians that leave the fee for service model. And I think that's probably necessary. But I was very concerned that that wasn't put to the membership as a formal vote. Um, I myself, as a negotiator, would not have accepted terms of negotiation that didn't allow me during the negotiation process to say, well, hang on a second, we should check this with our members. Because as you know, it was made very clear to us, there was very strong, after some unfortunate comments by Doctors of BC senior members about fee for service that were widely criticized by fee for service physicians, it was put to us that there would be no funding leaving the fee for service model. And that doesn't appear to be completely true. And I know that people have said that is true, but perhaps I'm reading it wrong. I mean, one has to be gracious about these things. A lot of work has been put into it and a lot of advocacy. So I think, like many things, we should give it a chance. And at the end of the day, it's only 3 years. If it's a disaster, well, then it's a disaster and we try something else. But something really, Lawrence, had to be done. And I think the primary thing is it addresses the real problem of people like you in city practice, where with like the rentals are extraordinary and so many of you are leaving. I think, unlike in the past where the primary problem was rural physicians, now the primary problem is guys in the city who have to pay their rent. And if you and I'm getting very verbose, but one of the other things I like and that I'm really vehemently opposed to as an older physician is the corporatization of family practice. I think that does nobody any good. And they're all of these, in my opinion, creepy corporations who will remain nameless. We all know who they are, buying up GP practices as commodities. And then the family physicians who are in those practices are basically forced to toe the corporate line, which I think is untenable. Most of us went to medical school to avoid that. If I wanted to work as a Walmart drone, I'd work at Walmart, you know, without being insulting. I mean, I was brought up, I was brought up as in a blue collar family, so I'm certainly no snob, but I was brought up that every job is honorable. But we all went to medical school and became professionals to avoid being corporate drones. I'm very pleased that many of you in the city will now be able to say to these people, take a hike. We'll keep our practice. Thank you very much. And I'm also hopeful that it will drive the only telehealth people out of business, frankly. I think they should be
Mm,
tarred and feathered myself.
mhm. It's so clear to me that you really value the autonomy that is allowed in any in the health professions, and that that you're naturally suspicious of any type of corporate management when it comes to healthcare.
I think that's true. And I have worked for a corporation, for a big mine. I worked for Anglo American, which is at the time the biggest mining corporation in the world. And I think one always has to question their motives. I mean, none of our motives are purely altruistic, even physicians, right? Like to claim otherwise is just silly. We're doing it for the children. Come on. But I think genuinely, I've worked in many places, and I think most physicians are genuinely caring. This is not a university degree that lends itself to people who are not caring, because you won't finish. It's too hard. You won't continue doing it. It's too tough. It's too personally tough, unless at some level you love it. And I believe corporations are essentially amoral, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But in the context of healthcare, I'd rather have you running a city practice than phone company health, you know,
From company health. Yeah,
whatever his
it's
name may be. Mm.
I think the health system in Canada was based on a very idealistic concept, like a kind of a spirit of compassion where everybody should have access, and it's tax it's funded by public money,
Mm.
and it does feel weird to me to take a lot of public money and then route it towards the private sector. Um,
It should
but
go
it
the other way. I mean, if we're going to have private involvement in health, make it, part of the problem is, I mean, I'm not a huge proponent of private health. I haven't really worked in it, since I was very young. And I find it a little distasteful. When I was a resident, I remember, people being sent out of high-tech private hospitals to my government hospital with the clinical indication ran out of money on their insurance. I found that very distasteful. But I do think that there's almost an ideological fear with Canadians of private healthcare. And I think that's because they look at private healthcare and they look south. Now, even the Americans don't want their private healthcare system. And, all of the top systems in the world, which I must point out is not us, all have some degree of private involvement in healthcare, but the money goes from private to public, not the other way around. What we're doing is obscene. We're putting public money into private corporations. That's exactly the reverse of what they do in France, Germany, Korea, where private insurance funds pay government hospitals to take care of their patients. Not always, some are purely private hospitals, but I think Canadians are going to have to accept, with the spiraling costs of healthcare, that there will have to be some private involvement. And the way to do that is the other way, exactly the opposite of what we're doing. Phone company health are taking money and physicians out of the system. We need, you know, systems that put money back into our system and that augment it rather than take away from it. And
Yeah.
that's not just, I'm not a huge proponent of private care, but I think we all have to accept that the money is not endless. We can only tax people up to a degree.
Hmm. Yeah, sometimes I wonder about the motivations of these corporations who are buying up family practices in British Columbia. Like, are they really thinking that they will be able to design workflows and operations such that they can just slowly, milk all of the MSP
Well,
money
there's
out of the
only
system?
one way to control costs in healthcare. If you don't have additional funding, is rationing, isn't it? Like, that's the only way you can control costs. So the only way these people can control costs is say, well, no, sorry, John, we don't want you doing lots of biopsies, because then we have to buy surgical sets, and you can see it from these. You can see it. I mean, I take referrals from these people, well, should we really be doing PAPs? Because a PAP light is $150 and a speculum is X amount, and do we really need that many staff members, like nurses, to give injections? Can't they go to the pharmacy? So I think the only way they can do this to make it more profitable is rationing. And who are you rationing? You're rationing people in the public system that now, I mean, some poor bastard has to go and wait 3 hours at a pharmacy to get a tetanus shot. Like, is that really what Tommy Douglas envisaged? I think not.
I don't know what he envisaged, but you're right. Not
And I'm
board.
Canadian, I'm Canadian enough now, and I'm proudly Canadian, to say that certainly this is not what we want as Canadians. I don't.
Yeah. Have you heard a little bit about the concept of the triple aim or the quadruple aim or the quintuple aim?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, what do you think of it? Does it make sense to try to balance all these different priorities of population health, professional experience, patient experience, and and cost savings, or
Well,
resource stewardship and equity?
I think you have to, and I think most medical associations around the world have made it clear. Unfortunately, this is another thing that falls on GPs, as you know, family practitioners. I mean, the CMA a number of years ago in 2004 made a statement that we were basically responsible for the costs in the healthcare system, which is a little unfortunate. And there have been many drives, but I do think some of that is true. You can't order a CT scan for every headache in a public health system. Not every back pain person should get an MRI. I worry a little bit about the emphasis on patient experience. I think to some degree, if you live in a public health system, there must be some kind of understanding at a fundamental level is that you get the care you need, but not necessarily the care you want. They're not really the same. And part of the problem with the private care system, specifically in America, is that physician experience is directly correlated to payment and employment. People come and say they saw Dr. Yang or Dr. Penhall, and how did they feel? Like, were they polite? There's something in that. But but did Dr. Yang or Dr. Penhall refuse to give them 700 Percocets for their back pain? Well, now their rating's gone down. So I worry a little about patient experience as a primary indicator. That's not to say patient experience is not important. Obviously, we want to treat patients equitably. We don't want racist comments to patients, sexist comments to patients. And obviously, coming from South Africa, I feel very strongly about that. We don't want patients to feel that culturally their experience is poor. But purely from an emotional point of view, I think that sometimes Canadians are a little schizophrenic. They want the American experience, but they want the Canadian payment model. You can't really have both, like many things in life. Do you agree? I'm not knocking it, but I'm just saying that patient experience has to be tempered by the fact that they need to realize that, no, sorry, sir, you can't get your MRI tomorrow for your non-urgent problem like you could in Seattle, but that doesn't make us a bad system. Balance is key, right?
Yes, absolutely. Thankfully, I've not come across too many um, unreasonable demands from the public in terms of my services. Most patients are quite understanding of the
Most
burdens
are,
on the
absolutely.
system.
Yep,
Yeah,
most are.
yeah. I think the patient experience that we typically speak of is that, just as you said, um, equitable treatment, treatment that has an intention around mitigation of biases when it comes to
Mhm,
how they are treated and respected.
mhm.
You mentioned that when you'd left South Africa, apartheid was just ending,
Just
that,
ending.
and that was in the 90s. Is that right?
In the 90s, yeah, 94, 95, 96 is when
It's
it all went on.
it's so surprising that apartheid was lasted that long. I mean, for some of us actually have never grown up actually knowing or experiencing anything like that,
Oh, it was
including us.
absolutely appalling. I mean, it was absolutely appalling. I mean,
Mm,
there's no, you know, I mean, I was a little bit of a political activist, so I preferred to work in what was then a black hospital in a inner city. That was where I chose all my rotations. Um, I mean, I think the population had enough. You know, the mostly young white people in, I think, 1993, we had a referendum whether we would, whites own, well, it wasn't only whites that could vote. Whites, Asians, and Indians, what we considered East Indians, were all allowed to vote. Black people were not. But so that voting bloc, which was a smallish portion of the population, there was actually a referendum. Should we deal with the ANC, the African National Congress, who were banned at the time? Essentially meaning, should we get rid of this whole ridiculous structure, you know? And I think 66% of the population voted to say yes. And when that vote was done, that became a fait accompli, that it was just a question of how do we do this without a civil war. And you know, the African National Congress and the Nelson Mandela, who was then released from prison, um, and the more enlightened kind of white ruling class at the time managed to unravel all of this without. I mean, there was a lot of violence, but that was mostly criminal without a civil war, which was really on the cards. There were a lot of armed, angry people. So it was quite an achievement at the time. I mean, things are tough there. You know, Africa is a poor place, and and I think a lot of maybe the things that Africans expected would happen from the West perhaps didn't happen. You know, there was a lot of inducements from Western countries about how they would come in and bring money and expertise in to rebuild the country. And in my opinion, as an African, that didn't really happen. It was kind of yesterday's news. Okay, the apartheid thing's gone. You guys sort yourselves out. Life is not quite that simple, you know. I mean, one of my dear friends says, "Now you know what it's like to be Aboriginal." Yeah, you know.
Wow. Wow.
So, but you know, I mean, the hospital system was very polarized. There were white and black hospitals.
Mm,
Um, you know, I don't think there was that much difference in care because most physicians and nurses, even under apartheid, didn't really care who they were treating, but there was certainly
mm,
a difference in funding, and that changed very quickly. And it's a
mm,
blended system. It's still a blended system. Most working people have private insurance, like even kind of blue collar people will have private insurance. They have an enormous problem with illegal aliens. In some ways, like the southern United States, you know, South Africa is relatively safer and more prosperous than most of Africa. So, you know, you walk around places in South Africa and you meet people from 2,000 miles away from Ethiopia and places like that. So they do have it's and you know for a country like America, it's causing huge demands on their health system. I mean, in a place like South Africa where there's limited funding, it's caused enormous demands, you know,
mm,
on the health system. So they have struggled.
mm.
Um,
You'd mentioned Nelson Mandela briefly. All I know about him is that he has said really wise things, and he was in jail for a long time. What?
but he was very
What?
brave, you know. He was a lawyer, um, and he I think he was always he was famously jailed in a major trial in South Africa, which is famous to South Africans, maybe not the rest of the world. He was interesting, represented um, by the man who founded my school. I was on a bursary to a Greek school. Greek is one of my languages, and George Bezos, and famously sentenced to life in jail for terrorism under the South African Terrorism Act because he believed in the armed struggle. He never actually committed any terrorist acts himself, but he did support the armed struggle. And what was remarkable about him was the fact that he was incredibly conciliatory. You know, he really made a lot of personal effort at a lot of personal cost as a very old man to prevent any violence. You know, and greatly loved by many people who years before would have been ardent racists, respected Mandela. You know, as like a father figure. I actually met him once when my wife graduated from law school. He was given an honorary degree at my wife's degree ceremony. So he actually, and I mean, by then he was the president of the country, and he might have just been the president elect actually. And he mingled with all the students, and I was there because I was married already, and I didn't meet him very much, but he said hello and was very charming and spoke to all the parents, which in itself was remarkable because the University of Pretoria prior to that had been almost exclusively white and Afrikaans speaking. So he was extremely gracious. Yeah, so I met him once. Yeah.
Wow. 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 Very special.
Mm,
So you've lived through some challenging social times and some political strife and wins, some wins in politically within
mm,
in South Africa, and you've experienced the impacts of different governance in different
mm,
countries. You've also experienced non-government organizations in the context of relief care and things like that. What what are some of your hopes for Canada going
Well,
forward?
I think there's a number of them. I think kindness is key. You know, with the thing that has made me most impressed by my colleagues all over the world wherever I've worked is, you know, we can all talk about how well qualified we are, how special we are, how clever we are, but you know, kindness is key. Like, let's be kind to one another as health professionals, as the public. Let's be kind to physicians. Kindness is key. I think, in terms of economics, there needs to be a general acceptance in Canada that healthcare is not cheap. and it gets exponentially more expensive, particularly seeing as our system is now a victim of its own success, because people are getting increasingly older and their care gets exponentially more. And our funding is not doctors and nurses and all these silly things. Our problem is funding. That is going to be our problem going forward. How do we fund this? And I think, even though, as I say, I'm not a huge proponent of private care, I think we're going to have some kind of blended system. I can't see an alternative that's reasonable, because, you know, if you look at Canada economically, a high percentage of the tax, I think it's 50 to 60%, is paid by people who earn under $200,000 a year. And already, if you earn more than $100,000 a year, you're paying almost 50% tax. Like, how are we going to fund this? We can't charge these people 60% tax, you know. So I think we're going to have to. I think we've had a good look at how we fund family physicians in BC, but that's on a microscopic level. But on the macroeconomic level, we are going to have an intelligent discussion about how do we fund healthcare going forward. You know, and this will encompass everything, because everything needs funding. You know, Aboriginal health needs funding. Their funding model is already a problematic, blended private model. We don't know who funds what. You know, inner city funding is different. We have this enormous addictions pandemic, which has killed way more people than COVID. So how do we fund all of this? Well, I think I don't think the taxpayer I don't know how we can continue to fund this just with government money. And again, we need models that are kind and reasonable, and in my opinion, the best people to be in control of this are health professionals. One of the things that I lament about Canada, and I think this is because we're not private, is the lack of physicians in senior management. I mean, we have a province the size of British Columbia, and the Minister of Health is not a physician or a nurse. That to me is absolutely lamentable. And part of the problem with that is we don't have an entrenched culture of health management here. In other countries like the UK, South Africa, which is a small country, the US, there's lots of physicians out there with medical MBAs, you know, PhDs in medical economics. That's a very rare thing here. And that's because there's no impetus for physicians to do that, because, you know, it's not remuneratively really good to be in one of these Department of Health positions. They're highly political. Most physicians, in my experience, are not highly political. So that's also something we need to change. There needs to become a more entrenched culture of physician management. And expecting us to take ownership of that is hard. I mean, I'm at the stage in my career in life where I'm really not that interested in physician management. And frankly, I never was. You know, I like to comment from the sidelines, but I have managed as a physician, but it's not my thing. But there are people out there who really are interested and have, you know, if you look on our chat group, there's some people there who are clearly very economic, like yourself, who are clearly interested in management. And we need to foster that culture, because we should be in charge of this. And I don't think in a paternalistic sense. You know, I have an old friend from Botswana who says paternalism is the worst kind of racism, which is absolutely true. Paternalism is horrible. But I think as stewards of this, the people, because we're all patients after all. I mean, I've been a patient and very ill. My kids have been. So, but we're in an excellent position to know how to manage this process. We need more physicians in control of the money and more physicians in control of the process. I mean, I get emails every day from Island Health. We've put in another executive vice president for patient flow. What the hell is patient flow? You know, like, I've got Aboriginal patients that can't see a psychiatrist for a year. Why do I care about this crap? You know, so if we had more physicians in charge, I'm sure if some physician would go in there and say, okay, we don't need 16 executive vice presidents to run the catering service. Why are we taking in, you know, I mean, we've had senior physicians involved in the IT. You know, we had a meeting several years ago with Island Health where they put in their new computer system, which is very poor. I mean, no family physician would ever accept the Cerner system in their office. You just laugh. I mean, they'd come and demo it to you, you'd laugh them out of your office. They spent 250 million on this, and they 100 million odd over budget. And you know, we had this physician who was very nice come and talk to us about how they were implementing it, who was a retired, not retired, but an internal medicine physician. And one of my colleagues got up and said, like, why are you here? So she said, well, to explain the new system. He's like, no, why are you here? Why is the person not fostering the system a graduate from one of the finest computer science universities in the world, the University of British Columbia? Why are you here? You're a physician. So that cuts both ways too, right? Like, let's put the right people in the right positions. Let's use our universities to foster the system. I notice in all the health, we have this ridiculous situation in the health authorities where you've got doctors and nurses, which we have shortages of, in non-clinical management positions. How on earth can a nurse be in charge of housekeeping? How on earth, I understand how they can be in charge of it, but how on earth is that a useful, no private company would ever allow that. If I, as the chief medical officer of a mining company, had put an RN in charge of housekeeping in my hospital, I would have justifiably lost my job for being an idiot. Why are you doing that? You know?
There's the John Penhall that I know.
Accountability is true too, right? Government, the problem with government, there's very little accountability. We know it's very impossible to fire people. We just shift them around like pawns on the chessboard. But accountability is also important. It's an important part of QI. And not accountability in the sense of punishment, although sometimes that's important, but accountability in terms of, like, we've given you all this money. What are you doing with it? Where are you
Value.
sending it?
Yeah, the return on investment.
Return on investment. You know?
Yeah. It's interesting because, on one hand, you've said it's important that physicians lead some of this stuff, but it's also important that the physicians are in the right positions.
That's correct.
That they're not out of their scope.
Yeah.
And I think there's a prevailing belief that physicians don't belong in any of this because, just as you said, there is a careerism to some of this medical administration, medical operations administration stuff. And if we let physicians in there, those careers disappear potentially. And then it destroys the whole, what do you call it? For the military industrial complex, there's like the healthcare industrial complex, isn't there?
Well, I call it the medico-political class, as you know. And they, and they are useful, but sometimes they fill me with contempt. I think it's for instance, to get a budget in a public health system and announce to the people in your system that we were under budget. How the hell can you be under budget? Under budget, you're not a company. If you Walmart and you're under budget, you get a promotion. If the critical care system of Fraser Health and you're under budget, you should get fired. That means people, so essentially what you're saying is, hooray,
you ration something.
Underservice somebody.
We underserviced.
Hooray, we underserviced somebody and saved money. No, you didn't save money. You underserviced somebody.
Because you're recognizing that the need is endless.
The need is endless. Yes. And I mean, I guess, like, I'm old now, so I can say what I like, and I know these things are not I know these things are not simple, but I have had to deal with budgets, and when I was younger, and these things are not impossible. But I do think funding is key. I think there's not enough money in Canada to fund what's going to be needed going forward. And I think we need to understand that. And whatever the solution is, it's not going to be taxing the population more. I mean, one of the biggest problems of family physicians is tax. Right? You know that.
Yeah. And I think healthcare is eating up at least 60% of our tax
absolutely.
revenue in British Columbia.
One of my arguments always, in terms of funding family physicians more, is I know we've got this wonderful new system that's going to save us all, but it would have been very simple for the federal government to meet with provincial government and say, look, we're really in trouble with family physicians. Why don't we give specifically family physicians with practices significant tax breaks? It would have been a very easy way to avoid a lot of awkward negotiations. And one of the other problems, I think, with Canada is we have this weird idea about equity. Much equity in life. Doctors are, unfortunately, there's not equity between doctors and lawyers, and I'm married to a lawyer. There's different funding system, different payment expectations, different responsibilities. So we have this weird kind of quasi-socialist equity aspirations.
You almost said bullshit there.
It's bullshit. Yeah, it's bullshit. Of course it's bullshit. Because one of the arguments I got to this from my MP was, well, why should we give doctors tax breaks and not hardworking people who own A&W? Well, okay, do we have a shortage of restaurant owners? Is there a burger shortage? Are people dying from lack of burger? Well, no. So there are other ways of dealing. We haven't been very innovative. I mean, GPs are taxed to death. and you know, and I'm not particularly political, but our new government made, for instance, something that doesn't apply to me because I'm married to income splitting. There was an excellent way for physicians to be able to avoid tax.
Mm,
And there's also, you know, tax avoidance is perfectly legal and expected. Your tax evasion is different. But there was, and that was taken away from us federally, centrally. That made a huge difference. Not to me really, because my wife is a professional, so you can't really split income with somebody who earns as much as she does. But a lot of my colleagues, it was a huge hit to them, huge hit, huge
mm,
hit, 50, 60,000 a year, you
mm,
know. And so there's innovative solutions for physicians and nurses. Nurses get almost no tax breaks because they're employees.
mm.
Like,
I'm- yeah. I'm curious about, as you said, how come people aren't you? How come the government is not using tax incentives in that
I
way?
find it hard.
I think it may be a fear of a precedence or a fear of, as you said,
Fear
an
of
inequity.
equity, like this weird equity thing, you know. Bombardier
Mm.
gets huge tax breaks. It's one of the biggest tax sinks in the history of the world.
Who gets huge tax break?
Bombardier. I mean, how
They
many
make.
times have we bailed Bombardier out federally? Or
Mm,
SNC Lavalin? Billions upon billions. During the 2008 crisis, we spent billions bailing out car companies, for God's sake. You know, like, you know, and I get it. I mean, I think the concept of too big to fail is, I don't particularly agree with it, but is a reasonable thing. But what's, you know, and there are all these people, these moronic comments by some of us even in the media about doctors don't want to be in small business. You know, well, I mean, if you're not an employee, to some degree, you're in small business, whether you own a lawnmower and mow people's lawns or whether you a general surgeon. I mean, they were preposterous, silly comments, and
mm,
you know, they were fodder for ignorant people. But one of the ways you stimulate small to medium business is really with tax incentives, right?
mhm,
And even medical corporations, they're highly restrictive. I mean, if you can, again, if you compare the guy who cuts my lawn, who's a small corporation, he has much more leeway with his corporation than a medical corporation. You know, so
mhm.
there's small ways you can help out and make the, you know, at the end of the day, you have to make it attractive for physicians or whoever else. You know, let's take physicians out of it. You want more baristas at Starbucks. Pay them more, give them better benefits, give them tax breaks, educational lump. Starbucks actually offers university scholarships now. So let's stop talking about physicians. Let's talk about what markets dictate. For some reason, because we're paid by the government, people seem to think that we removed from market forces. I think, of course, we're not. That's why all of you guys in the cities are running away. The market forces are making your rentals outrageous. They're making your staff costs outrageous because your staff can't afford to buy a house. So if you practice in Surrey, they're coming from Abbotsford because that's where they can live. They're driving 150 kilometers a day to work for you. So that's driving up your costs. You know, market forces are real. And I think as Canadians, I mean, a lot of my patients, and you may have experienced this, were under the impression that the government paid for my clinic. You know this, eh? I did a straw poll about 5 years ago where I actually asked every patient I saw, who do you think pays the bills here? 50% said the government. They didn't
Yeah,
realize that, like, that was out of my pocket.
yeah,
I think education is key too.
it is, and public perception is so
Public
key.
perception, yeah.
Yeah. You said that your wife works as a lawyer, and
Volunteer, yeah.
you've actually used some of her wisdom to assist me in the past. I appreciate that with telephone call. Um, how has that helped you as a physician, having that resource so close to home?
Well, I think the biggest help is financial, obviously.
Oh, okay.
You know, I think, you know, and that's honestly, if it wasn't for, I think I probably would have gone back into an expat job years ago, you know, when you have children and financial realities come to you. But certainly she's a very clever woman, right? You know, she has numerous degrees. She's qualified in 3 countries. Um, and obviously, you know, it also it I think a lot of people in general are afraid of dealing with the court system, with the legal system. They get a lawyer's letter and they find it incredibly stressful. You know, I get a lawyer's letter and I'm okay, you know. She doesn't do medico legal law, but obviously, you know, she qualified in
Mhm.
Canada, so she has some idea of it, and
mm,
that demystifies the whole process and makes it less scary, right? I mean,
mm,
Canada is not actually a very litigious place for physicians. You know, we're very well protected by CMPA, and as you know, I do some consulting work for CMPA. I've always found them to be an incredible resource.
mm,
The lawyers who in BC who deal with all the CMPA stuff are called Harper Gray in Vancouver.
mm,
They're incredibly professional. They do not throw us under the bus. If they genuinely believe that you were that based on the opinions of their experts that something you did was truly not malpractice, they
mm.
will literally spend $1 million to fight off $100,000 claim. So it's not like
Yes.
America where the insurers will say, "Well, we know Lawrence, you did nothing wrong, but we're going to give this guy 100 grand to settle." Harper
Mm.
Gray and CMPA do not do that.
Yeah. Have you ever worked with Queen's Counsel Terry Robertson before he retired? No. Oh, okay.
You know, I've worked with so many over the years. I don't know,
Okay.
but I've always found them to be incredibly professional, competent,
Hmm.
not cheap. You know,
Hmm.
I mean, all of us experts are. We're not cheap. You know, this.
Hmm.
I take these things extraordinarily seriously, and I spend hours and hours doing them. Um, what has concerned me, and I give the medico-legal lectures to our residents, is the attitudes of the colleges here have changed. You know,
Mm.
I think the college doesn't often enough say to patients who are clearly, in some cases that I've seen personally, delusional,
Mm.
say to them, okay, sorry, you know, this is where it stops. We know, you know, and the problem is the membership. What happens is the membership are less trusting of the college now. So the tendency is amongst physicians when they get that letter from the college is not to reply to it at all and to go straight to
Mm.
CMPA. And that's entirely understandable given some of the curious communiques that are coming out of the college, you know, like we've had this thing with like the death thing. I need a death plan. That
Hmm.
was tremendously, I thought that was tremendously
It was
tone
out
deaf.
of touch. Yeah, it was tone deaf. It was out of touch with the
The
context.
logo
Yeah.
that they've clearly spent a lot of money was clearly tone deaf at a time where we should really be spending money on our members. The
Mm.
call thing for GPs I thought was astonishing. Even though that has been, one of the guys on the website was quite correct that that has been a prerequisite since 1995. It's never been enforced for good reason. That was
And,
incredibly tone deaf at a time when we hemorrhaging family physicians to say you got to, people are going to be able to phone you 24/7 without payment. Without
hmm.
payment. That's great. Try that with your barista. Honey, I'm going to phone you at 3 in the morning to come and make me a latte. We won't pay you. You must do it for love. It's not
Must do it for love.
it's,
Yeah.
it's so I do think that's a concern. I think that's driving up costs that people are going to CMPA for every lawyer's letter. But I do understand it.
Hmm. You know, you've spoken about the importance of kindness going forward, and I think so many of us got into these healing professions because of kindness.
Of course.
But then we do need to have healthy, sustainable boundaries for
Yes,
ourselves,
we do.
because when we don't, I think we naturally build up resentment towards the system, towards something that is doesn't serve us.
Well,
But it,
the best phrase for it is compassion fatigue.
mm,
And I think that's a wonderful way of putting it.
yeah, what does that mean to you?
So compassion fatigue to me means, you know, you've been driven down enough that somebody comes to you really needing your time and empathy and you don't give it. And I've
Mm,
always said when you get to that point, and we all get to that point in our day or whatever, okay, now it's time to go home.
mm,
It's time for me to go and throw a fly at a fish or go to
mhm,
rugby practice with the team that I coach and run around. That's
mm.
time
Yeah,
to take a week off.
get into our bodies, connect with nature.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hmm.
You know, and compassion fatigue is a real thing. And
Oh, very real.
there's
Hmm.
been good studies on these things. I mean, burnout, I don't even know what that means.
Mm,
Compassion fatigue to me is key because
mm,
compassion fatigue to me means that if you're saying that, that person may really need you medically, morally, spiritually, and you're unavailable. So I
mhm,
think, and you know, people talk about these new age. I mean, I'm old, Lawrence. You know, people talk about moral outrage. I don't know what moral outrage means or moral injury, for heaven's sake. I'm African. Injury usually happens from a 9 millimeter projectile. But compassion fatigue means you're not giving the proper care you should be giving to these people. And whether you, well, regardless of what your payment model is or how tired you are, like there's a service component to medicine.
mm.
There's a service component. You know,
Yes.
if you're not giving them, and we all make mistakes. I mean, certainly I'm not perfect. I've made my share of mistakes, been rude to people. Sometimes my wife, you know, in a small town, people will say to my wife in the super, oh, I know your husband. I'm like, oh God. You know, some of them are like, he was wonderful. Some of them, he was a complete dick. So I mean, we all have days where we are not at our best. But I think
Yeah, we're human. Yeah.
passion fatigue is when the preponderance of time is when you're not at your best. That's a problem.
It's time to recharge. Yeah.
And we need better supports for doctors suffering from that, because that's why
Yes,
some leave and they do these easy jobs. You know, and I'm not disparaging my colleagues, but they leave family practice is hard.
it
And they go
is.
for these easier jobs, hospitalist jobs. And I'm not, please, you guys, please don't send me nasty emails. I work in the hospital too. But they go for jobs where there's less expectation of continuity, where you have to deal with people undergoing difficult personal problems who may themselves be very difficult. That's why they leave. They go to episodic care, you know, hospital care, cancer care, which is, of course, very hard, but it's episodic. You know, emergency care. I've been very tempted to become an emerge physician. I do a lot of emerge, but but I'm also racked by guilt, right? Like I can't leave. I have a
Mm.
huge, I just can't.
You have such strong guilt to carry that heavy
Can't leave them, and I
responsibility.
understand. You know, we've had physicians that you and I both know, like really suffering like a terrible personal crisis because they've chosen to leave practice for reasonable reasons. It's reasonable to leave for money. The older I get, I sometimes want, like, I love being a GP and I still love my job. But I often regret not becoming a plastic surgeon just because of venal reasons. You know, kids going to college, it would be a lot easier if I made like 400 grand a year more, you know?
Yeah.
So I completely understand. So I find it very hard. You know, there's a Greek saying about you should never criticize. I mean, this is sexist, but you should never criticize the way another man earns his bread. And I really do believe that
Mm,
strongly.
mm,
You know, I may make fatuous comments, but when a colleague chooses to go into practice because they can make more bang for their buck, care for their family better as a hospitalist, it would be really morally wrong of me to be critical. Not that I like
mm,
the fact that they're doing that to me is outrageous, and the fact that they need to do that is even more outrageous.
that the
So,
system forces
but
that.
for
Yeah.
them personally, and I've seen some of the guys in our group chat that are literally racked with guilt because they've chosen to become ERPs or chosen to move to Alberta and leave their practice behind. Like, that's terrible. It's terrible for them.
ERPS is ER physician.
ER physicians.
Okay.
Horrible for them because I do understand. I mean, I'm just in the lucky position where I do have financial support from my wife, and
Mm,
I'm in a smaller community. My overheads may be a bit lower, and I'm a bit older. Um,
mm,
but I feel for them because I feel their distress at doing that.
yeah.
You know, I've got 4 kids in my house tonight from my kids' rugby team. They're all running around upstairs, God knows what, on the internet. I delivered 2 of them, right? They're
Mm.
14. Hard to run away,
Yeah.
hard to leave. And I think that's what's been distressing for me. A lot of these, and that hasn't been made clear to the public. A lot of the public, like, oh, you're all earning 135 grand a year more. Well, we're not, because that's a wish, not a promise. So that's also bullshit. But, you know, a lot of these guys who've left practice, a lot of them would have been distressed to leave. Because at the end of the day, most of the physicians I've met in my relatively long life around the world have been kind, caring, no matter what they looked like, no matter what their gender was, their
Hmm.
sexual orientation, their language. The common thread between that binds us all is kindness. So a
Hmm.
lot of those physicians suffered a lot of stress by retiring early and saying,
Mm.
God, I can't pay 50 grand a month in West Van for it. I'm going to have to stop.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to. So
Yeah.
a lot of those physicians, I think we've diminished their suffering by making it purely venal and saying, well, they weren't making enough money, so they buggered off to Alberta. Yeah, a lot of those guys are suffering still from that. Eh?
Mm.
And if any of you are listening, I'm a nobody. I'm just a GP in Campbell River, but I appreciate how much that must have cost you all,
Mm.
cost you morally.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Mm.
I want to end off with something fun. You said you said Greek is one of your languages.
Mhm.
You speak English, obviously. What are some of your other languages?
So I speak Afrikaans. I didn't actually speak Afrikaans. I went to university. I went to go to veterinary school. And once I arrived,
Oh,
the only veterinary school in South Africa is at the University of Pretoria, which at the time was Afrikaans only, because I came out of a Greek community school. And then I decided to go to medical school, but the problem was that I didn't speak Afrikaans. So obviously I had to learn. So I learned Afrikaans. If you speak Afrikaans, you speak Flemish, because Flemish is almost, you can read
oh,
quite a lot of Dutch. And then because I speak Greek, I understand quite a lot of Italian, Spanish, and I speak Setswana, which is the language of Botswana. Not very well anymore. I haven't spoken for 20 years. My wife speaks it very, very well. She was a member of the judiciary. Even though the language is, the official language of Botswana is actually English.
Oh,
But yeah, I speak it relatively well, yeah. But Afrikaans
wow.
and Afrikaans and Greek are the secret languages for my kids. They don't speak them. They speak French. They don't engage in English. They speak French.
So you have potentially, you speak
About
Greek,
5. Yeah.
yeah, Greek, Afrikaans, Flemish,
Mm.
D Danish, you said?
No, Setswana.
Oh,
Setswana. And
Setswana,
Dutch. And Dutch. If you speak
Dutch.
Afrikaans is essentially to Dutch and Flemish what Akkadian French is to French. It's 15th
Ah,
century Dutch. Yeah.
wow.
Hmm.
Well, John, you've lived quite a few lifetimes, compared to
Hmm.
some of us who've just kind of stayed in North America, and
Not by choice, but yeah.
our time's up today, and I just really want to appreciate you for coming, putting yourself out there, sharing your ideas and opinions. I think it's going to impact people. I think people are going to be inspired, and they'll have some laughs. And yeah, thank you for taking the time, and thanks for always engaging with us on the platform. It really
Thank you,
means,
Lawrence, for all your kindness and hard work.
thank
It's
you. It means so much to have you as part of the community, and continue speaking your mind.
and
It's
getting in trouble. And getting in trouble.
it's fun. It's fun seeing
But I'm
you.
always prepared to be proven wrong.
Oh,
So
yes.
happy to be
Yeah. And that's the thing. When you
Thank
have
you.
the courage to engage, it's because you're willing to engage and to have a back and forth. And we need that. We need
Yeah,
opposing opinions if we
we
want
do.
the best innovation. Yeah,
But if kindness, and if you're going to say it, if you're going to dish it out, be prepared to take it, boy.
that's right.
That's life.
Have a great night, John.
Thank you. Take care of yourself,
Bye-bye.
Lawrence. Bye.
Bye-bye.